Thank you for watching my video discussion board for this week. So in response to our prompt, psychopathology as understood through the lens of a Christian worldview, specifically mine, is a consequence of the fall that occurred when mankind first sinned in the Garden of Eden, resulting in poorer mental health that God did not intend for his people. This can be seen in Genesis 3, and I will be using the English Standard Bible from 2001. So in the Christian circles that I've experienced, people, mostly Christians, who speak of the fall often only mention the physical ramifications such as sickness and death. Some women talk about painful childbirth, and mostly people talk about the spiritual consequences such as separation from God. But I encountered very few people, little to none, who talked about the mental ramifications that the fall had on our brains. So to me, it makes logical sense that if our physical bodies deteriorate, our mental health would too. Now, what does the Bible say about abnormality? So if God originally intended for man to be perfect or to be normal, then anything falling outside of that scope is abnormal. Now, I'm not saying that every person has a mental disorder, but once the fall occurred, the likelihood of man having poor mental health was more likely. And whenever we talk about how the secular world views abnormality, we'll talk about the more extreme cases. But according to Scripture, what God intended was the norm, and since that changed, everything else is abnormal. I do think of Romans 12:2, which states, "Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect." The way the world is not how God intended it to be, and this verse seems to be an encouragement that mankind can improve on this and fight against this abnormality to get back to what we were originally intended to be. Now, the secular world views abnormality differently. Abnormality can be defined by the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, or the DSM-5, which states, "A mental disorder is a syndrome characterized by clinically significant disturbance in an individual's cognition, emotion regulation, or behavior that reflects a dysfunction in the psychological, biological, or developmental processes underlying mental functioning." So this is from the American Psychiatric Association, publishing 2022. So the world will look at somebody's behaviors, somebody's thoughts, their mental processes, how they communicate, how they interact with people, their development. The world looks at all of these things, all of these aspects, all these traits of people, and gives them names for disorders. We have schizophrenia, we have bipolar disorder, and these disorders can be treated and potentially improved through treatment such as counseling or medication, and sometimes both. So that's the response to how the world views abnormality, and how it views abnormality is different than how the Bible views abnormality, but it's interesting to see the response to both. Now, this is my interpretation, and hopefully it makes sense, but thank you for joining me today.